I'm going to... Right.
Hello, Brendan.
Oliver Pritchard, how is all down in the lovely, well, I don't know what area to call your part of the city, and it seems like ages since I've seen you, about 24 hours.
A little bit over, yeah. Well, really, it's called Sucre, the barrio, but very few people outside would call it that. There was a pizza company that used to call this area Zona 42, but I've never heard that used by anybody else.
Oh, okay, interesting. Well, I'm just back from Cartagena and Santa Marta. I was up around there impersonating a professional footballer to try and get free things. We might actually touch on that story, guys. If you're wondering what we're on about, Google search after the show a false footballer up around Cartagena. Rather interesting story. As I said, we'll probably touch on it in passing as we move on. But will we have a look at what is coming up, Ollie, will we? Shall we?
Let's do exactly that.
Okay, well, football, Ollie, is our focus on tonight's Bogotá Nights, and by now, regular viewers will know it is Colombia's only live and interactive English language chat show. And while it's often said that Colombia is like at least 5 countries in one, whenever La Selección plays, such as today, it tends to unite the whole land. We'll be analysing the men's team of today and looking back at its recent evolution, going back about a decade or so, a golden period of sorts. Now, as much as La Selección unites, there are many domestic rivalries that divide. From a Bogotá perspective, it's blue versus red. We'll overlook the touch of green to the south. Kind of like Everton-Liverpool, but with the colours swapped in terms of success to an extent. Are you a Colombian football fanatic? Have you attended games here and been impressed or not by the atmosphere and the quality on offer? Whatever your favoured position on all this is, we want to hear your thoughts. See what I've done there? Anyway, send us your comments and experiences right now by using the live message facility. Or if you're watching this recorded, you can still get involved by commenting on where you're viewing or via tweet, the handle being at Bogotá Post with the hashtag Bogotá Nights. This show is all about viewer interaction after all, so do get involved, guys. We'll be tackling all that in the second half of the show, but first it's a review of the week's big news stories, and we're starting off in the border city of Cúcuta. Ollie, there was a time in Colombia when news of car bombs was an almost weekly affair. They are, thankfully, much less frequent these days, but when they do happen, there is always a concern of a return to much more violent times. What do we know about this Cúcuta blast?
Well, it's a very different type of car bombing that we've had, in recent years. But of course, there's a lot here that reminds us of the attack in 2019. If you remember the attack on the General Santander base, military training base in Bogotá. So, it's an attack on a military installation. It seems to have been very well planned, very well organized. There seems to be a lot of intelligence in it. Luckily, we don't seem to have seen deaths, unless there's been an update that I've missed. We're talking, mid-30s number of injuries. I think it's at 37 at the moment. 3 of them serious. So this could have been a lot worse. That's the kind of the positive element of this. It seems to be linked to ALN. That's what the Fiscalía are saying at the moment. The big question is this is this real ALN, or is this, disaffected, hard to control cells of ALN? And why weren't lessons learnt, from the last incident we had exactly like this?
Yeah, because just reading reports of how it happened, it's like guys apparently impersonating police officers and saying that they had to investigate something to do with carbon or something. Like, it seemed a rather strange story, and the guy at the gate lets them in. Now, unless they had very good fake IDs and all that kind of stuff, but surely like a phone call to the department of the police that they claim to represent would have uncovered unless there was a lot of insider involvement here. It does seem rather fishy, doesn't it?
Yeah, and they're saying that the authorities seem to be rejecting the idea that there was any kind of inside involvement. They're saying it's completely external. But yeah, it does. I mean, it just seems amateurish and slapdash. You're looking at a time, obviously, of very high tension. We're looking at a situation where we've had similar attacks. We're looking at a situation where public dissatisfaction with the military and with the police is at a high level. It just seems. But I've often thought this, Brendan, that I walk past police stations here, and I often think it doesn't look well protected. It doesn't look like they're taking their protection seriously. So we'll see. Now, if it's, I think the real big question is here: what on earth were ALN doing? I mean, if this is an ALN attack, and they don't seem to have denied that at this point. If it is an ALN attack, what on earth is this meant to be? What do they hope to achieve from this?
Well, it kind of resembles questions that many would have had about the IRA back in their bombing campaigns. What is the point? Especially when there are talks going. Apparently, I don't know with the Duque government now where those talks are. I think they have stalled with the official ALN, as you say. And of course, we don't know. I mean, it's what the government and official sources are saying, that it is the real ALN, if we can call them, that have done this. But who knows? Another element to this as well, of course, Ollie, is that apparently there were US military or at least personnel there in that barracks. So there's that side to it. And I believe we've the heavies of the FBI already in Cúcuta. And of course, just to place Cúcuta, in case there are people listening who aren't that familiar, it's right on the Venezuelan border. So it's a hot spot for obviously narcos, drug trafficking, and also other types of smuggling between the two countries. And parts of it, maybe not Cúcuta exactly itself, but all along that border is largely unpoliced. You could call it no man's land in many ways, just to put that in the picture. But about that US influence now, so we've got FBI agents especially in Cúcuta investigating as well. So you would expect some sort of efficiency. You would expect anyway.
Well, we'll see. I mean, it's not necessarily about how efficient the FBI operatives are exactly, as to what degree they're allowed to do their job, either by the Colombian government or the American government. I'm sure diplomats will get themselves involved in that.
Yeah, and just another point that comes into my head. Okay, we're still the best part of a year away from the 2022 election. But if we see an increase in such kind of attacks, it plays into that center-right, or even hard-right group here, which is always popular. But if there's a fear that the left are taking over, so I know I'm maybe entering into conspiracy theories here, but it would suit certain people of a certain political persuasion to have the country in a bit of a state of flux or insecurity being talked about, when we need the mano firme, corazón grande approach.
Yeah, this is doing no favors for Gustavo Petro, that's for sure. And look, yeah, Brendan, I would normally say, in most countries, I would say, look, you're being crazy, Brendan. You need to get your tin tinfoil hat off. But of course, in Colombia, where we had that very weird situation back in 2019 in the protests, you remember the storming of the conjuntos, in the country of the falsos positivos. Yeah, it's something we can't write off as being crazy conspiracy. It's something we have to think, certainly not saying it's I'm certainly not saying it's the top theory most likely to be true, but it's certainly not to be discounted.
Yeah. Okay. Well, by the way, guys, we do welcome your comments on the news review as well. So do get in touch. And in the second half of the show, we're going to be concentrating on football in Colombia, not just football of today, of the moment, because we've big La Selección game and Millonarios Tolima currently in progress. Last I heard 1-0 to Tolima in the first leg of that Liga Betplay final. But we're going to be talking about all of that. Comments very much welcome. Thanks to Paula Andrea saying she's happy to see us. I hope you can understand us as well, Paula. I hope the English is good enough. Ojalá que puedes entendernos. Anyway, you mentioned Gustavo Petro there, Ollie, and we haven't led with the strikes this week, but for the last 6-7 weeks we've been leading with the strikes. But the strikes now seem to be in certain areas petering out. But we had a potentially significant development. The Comité del Paro Nacional, the National Strike Committee, saying that they would look, do more than look, but would put forward a candidate for election next year. And you made an interesting comment when we were planning out this program that with what's happened in the Peruvian presidential election there, that like maybe some unknown of at this moment in time candidate comes out of the woodwork and could prove to be a game changer. So this could be a moment where we're going to get another player in the already muddied waters of Colombian politics.
Yeah, I mean that's a really fascinating move. Of course, there's a lot of people who, let's say, are very anti-Centro Democrático, but don't really have anywhere to go. There's a lot of people that will be thinking that they don't want to go to Petro. There'll be a lot of people certainly avoiding names like Peñalosa or Fajardo. Whoever Cambio Radical put up, probably not going to attract those voters. So there is definitely space, I think, in the political landscape. I think there's definitely a possibility to get a large base out of nowhere. As you know, we've just seen Pedro Castillo do that. Now, certainly very far from a convincing win, but he appears to have won that election. And he was really nobody if you look at Peruvian politics a year ago. Paro Nacional, it has great brand recognition. It's not the most loved place in the world, but there'll certainly be a lot of support for it. Could be an interesting development.
Yeah, and I mentioned, of course, about the strikes petering out. I have to say, because as I mentioned at the top of the show, I was down around your neck of the woods yesterday, and I came back up here to the far, far north on the Transmilenio and passed by Heroes, the epicenter in many ways of the strike movement in Bogotá. And it seems like there are people kind of just camped out there almost. I mean, maybe about 50, 60 people there. So there's this kind of ongoing presence, at least, to kind of maybe let people know we haven't got away, in a sense.
Yes, exactly. And of course, this is I think what will be difficult for them is that they will have to have they've had very vague goals. We've talked about that a lot. And they'll have to concrete stuff up. They'll have to say what they stand for rather than what they stand against. So, there's a rocky road ahead here.
Yeah, of course, it is easy to say you're against everything, but then it's easy to knock down things. It's more difficult to construct or reconstruct. But we will watch this space, and for as long as Bogotá Nights is coming your way, guys, we'll be keeping an eye on Colombian politics, entering into that kind of exciting time when we're going to find out who the actual candidates are for that 2022 presidential election. Ollie, just a quick one to mention about the metro. You were telling me that the government although you're kind of wondering, does it matter what Duque says these days if it's something that's going to happen a few years down the line? But they said they're going to help finance line two this is, of the metro. We're still obviously waiting for line one.
Yeah, look, that's. I mean, yeah, Duque saying this is just cheap political point scoring in many ways. I mean, it's nothing to do with him. By the time that line ever gets built, we're probably going to be two or even three presidents, in the future. So, yeah, it's easy for him to say. Whether or not it'll really sort of lead to anything, hard to say.
Yeah. By the way, Adam Armfield, thanks for getting in touch. I take it you're asking us, we should ask what the strike committee stands for. Well, as we said, we know what they don't want, and well, we know maybe certain reforms that they're looking for, but the devil will be in the detail of all those reforms, as we well know in this country. Don't mention the war, reforma tributaria, and invite them on. Well, we'll invite anybody on. Come on, strike committee guys. We'll have a chat. Duque, if he wants to come on. He speaks excellent English too. We could have him under the spotlight here on Bogotá Nights. But yeah,
I mean, with the greatest of respect to ourselves, I doubt Francisco will want to come on this show. Sadly, Francisco Maltese, of course, the leader of CUT. Yeah, I mean, so Adam makes. So, I mean, I would encourage you, Adam. We did a couple of good shows on this over the past month. I think it would be probably the start of April when things really heated up. We did a special 1 hour show on it. We talked at great length there over the aims. And the Bogotá Post website is absolutely full of lots of comment about the aims of the strike committee. I think one of the big problems is, though, Adam, what we're really referring to is that they haven't got a clear and cohesive strategy on most things. There are kind of vague calls and very specific targeted areas, especially with groups like FECODE. But what we don't have is kind of a foreign policy plan or anything like that, which they'd obviously have to do if they were to, if they are going to stand the presidential candidate. So it'll be interesting to see, if they can and in what direction they go. Also worth pointing out, a lot of people on the strikes don't really care about the strike committee as such, and certainly don't necessarily share their aims or goals.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point about perhaps people in their 20s, early 30s here that would go and vote. This kind of perception that anybody that's linked to the current establishment, that's been a politician, that's had anything to do with it, just tear the whole thing down. I guess that's what they'd be looking to do. I'm just looking at Adam's comment there as it flies in. But we'll move on to. I was going to say we're talking about the second line of the metro here, Ollie. Did you finish your point on that or not?
Oh yes. So look, I mean, I think what's really interesting about the metro development is, after so many years of a metro not being a thing and then being a thing and then not being a thing and then being a thing, it does look like the idea of having a metro is here to stay. So we can expect to see not just a single line, but 2 or 3 or 4 in the future. So that's positive, I think.
Yeah, well, it could be like your favorite Colombian city, Medellin, in maybe 2 decades' time. We'll have all these different metro lines. Ollie loves Medellin. His favorite city. You're thinking of moving there soon. Only that work has you here in Bogotá. Yeah, Adam, again, I would encourage you. You can search on YouTube as well, because I do post all these episodes or upload them to YouTube, so you can search back. We have mentioned this as well about, the disappeared and all the kind of stuff that's been going on during the strikes here, and a lot of.
I would like to address that though. So we've got to be really careful when we talk about the disappeared people, because a lot of those disappeared people are just missing people. So a lot of them have already turned up. haven't always been reported. The peculiarities of reporting people as missing in Colombia is it's quite an easy thing to do. It's quite easy to register somebody as missing, and they're not usually taken off once they're found. So you'll see lots of that sort of thing happen. Some of them turned up, some of them haven't. What we need to be really careful with, and we've talked about this so many times, is jumping to conclusions. Now, it's definitely worrying that a lot of people have gone missing, and it's indeed probable that some of them may well have been killed. That doesn't necessarily mean they were killed by security forces. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a sort of conspiracy behind this. And one of the big problems we've got, I think, throughout the whole kind of turbulence that we've had since the beginning of May, is that we've had this situation where dramatic stories pop up very quickly, and they're spreading around, and there's lots of memes, and then almost, a couple of days later, once we've had a bit of time to sort of sift through things, suddenly we find that actually there's a lot of inaccuracy, that things aren't quite correct, there's a bit of missing context, all that kind of thing. So we're really just waiting on groups like Temblores, Pacifista, let them do their work. 70 very good. Sorry, 070, very good. Let's let them do their job, and let's see where we are at the end of it all.
Yeah, and I think Ollie would be the first man to say falsos positivos is not a conspiracy as well. We certainly mentioned that.
We've literally mentioned that today, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In this country, you cannot rule anything in or out, and a lot of the time, we never get to the bottom of it. But of course, we certainly do know that falsos positivos happened, and a very, very sad moment in Colombian history. Anyway, Ollie, again, numbers, and I'm going to say this because you're talking about you have to wait and kind of see, and my take on the coronavirus pandemic and everything, but by all accounts, the numbers of deaths keep on climbing, and it's like, well, carry on regardless now at this stage. So it certainly seems like the Colombian officialdom has left it to the Colombian citizens to decide what they regard as appropriate behavior and appropriate measures to take, and just fire ahead. Bar the schools and universities are still softly returning, and it's kind of by a staged process. But apart from that, it's just vaccinate, and get on with your lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've talked in previous weeks about how Claudia Lopez especially is just kind of saying, look, I'm listening to the people. I realize you're not going to follow my rules, so I'm going to stop putting them in place. Which actually, I've got to say, I think that's good government. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and fair play for having the guts to go back on saying it irritates when politicians stick to things doggedly. So that's good. Of course, it does leave us in a bit of a worrying position, which is that we're still clocking up well over 500 deaths a day in most of the recent weeks. Lots and lots of new cases. UCI attendance is extremely high. Yeah, it's not a great position.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay. So we'll just see what happens over the next few weeks. Maybe it will peter out. We'll reach kind of a saturation point, and then numbers will fall. And of course, with the vaccination program ongoing as well, getting those most vulnerable vaccinated in any case. Ollie, I was in Centro Comercial Santa Fe just before the show, and a lovely looking lady came up and gave me this bottle of Coca-Cola sin azúcar, without sugar-free. There's just a law has been passed or at least I think that the bill of it, I don't know when it's going to become law in the Senate, to have messages on heavily processed, sugary, crappy food, sweet stuff and all that. Wonderful news, I guess, but do these things make any difference, really?
Probably not. I suspect, like we've seen in many countries, you put tax onto cigarettes and you just get more money from tax. People go on smoking. until you make it inconvenient for them to do it. They'll keep paying. And of course, people still pay for alcohol, which is heavily taxed to discourage use and all kinds of things like that. So yeah, to what degree will it work? Who knows? It does seem to have been relatively successful for AMLO in Mexico. So again, there's a nearby country with similar situations where where you can see there's been a positive effect. Overall, though, I doubt people's eating habits are going to change overnight, especially without especially good youth education.
Yeah. Well, I should mention on this Coca-Cola bottle, by the way, guys, it's not opened, and I don't intend to open it. Here's my tap water refrigerated in an orange juice bottle that I'm drinking.
Check out CR7 here.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I was just going to get to that point. I'm having my Cristiano Ronaldo moment. So you're going to see an uptake in drink water, guys. It's the healthier option, or at least orange juice. But Ollie, I mentioned at the top of the show at the introduction that I joked that I was in Cartagena and Santa Marta impersonating a professional footballer traveling around. But we had this rather curious tale of a gentleman named Bernio Jordan Enzo Verhagen, apparently a Dutchman who was traveling around Cartagena and Santa Marta, saying that he was this professional footballer and signed for all these top clubs in Europe, and managed to get a load of free stuff because I think he was making the purchases at the weekend and he was doing them electronically, and he was making these excuses up saying that
my money's arriving. Yeah.
What a weird story. Of course, it does lend to this thing in Colombia. Certain foreigners of a certain persuasion, Zach Morris, they're taken into their arms, and all of Colombia goes, oh, but they're wonderful. So they could say anything to them and get away with it, perhaps. It almost has kind of a touch of that to it.
Well, it's worth. I mean, he has pulled this stunt in a number of different countries. I think Denmark and Portugal, maybe. Okay. He seems to have been on the run. I mean, again, there's certain things, just absolutely baffle me. When people say, "Oh, well, the government's spying on us, and Facebook know more about us than we do," and blah blah blah. But then this man seems to have been undetectable by international police agencies, able to travel to Colombia without any worry and no outstanding arrest warrant. It just seems to be, absolutely bizarre. Very strange.
It was prostitutes that done him in the end, because they didn't want an electronic payment. They wanted cash. So he became unstuck there. But anyway, yeah, fascinating story, guys. If you're into it, you can do a search on this guy, the guy who impersonated being a professional footballer, Bernio Jordan Enzo Verhagen. By the way, Jacob Toms, thanks for getting in touch. As we said, guys, we welcome your comments, be it on the news or on our main topic, which is football in Colombia. In a general sense, of course, it's been a busy day. La Selección drawing with Venezuela, and Millonarios currently in action against Tolima. We'll get to all of that in a couple of minutes. But interesting point, and maybe we should do a topic on this, Ollie, drinking tap water here. Because he said he had the runs for drinking filtered water, because I just drink tap water here.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with it. It's fantastic quality. Bogotá spring water. For any English people of a certain age, they'll get that reference. What is worth mentioning, though, Brendan, although tap water is generally okay to drink in most areas of Colombia, especially basically the places where you expect it to be safe, it's going to be safe. Places, maybe don't do it out in the middle of the jungle. But I think what's really interesting, I mean, do remember, wherever you go in the world and however safe the water, just the different minerals and all kinds of things like that will generally give you a few stomach problems. That doesn't mean it's unsafe. It's just changing.
Yeah, but that's true. Actually, when I go back to Ireland now, I get the reverse thing. Like sometimes some of the food in Ireland, then I notice that I spend a little bit more time in the bathroom than I'd like to. But anyway, let's not go down that road. Let's when we get on. Oh, I meant to check. Because there was one sports story, the biggest sports story perhaps of the day, at the US Open in the golf. I know Ollie loves his golf, but I'm always keeping an eye on this Sebastian Munoz now, a Bogotano who's playing on the PGA Tour, with the big boys, put it that way. The last I checked, he hadn't completed his first round, but he was in and around the top, around there anyway. But let's get to our big topic here, guys. It is football in general in Colombia. We'll start in the moment, actualmente, as they would say in Spanish, and very currently, Millonarios at the minute are still a goal down to Deporte Tolima, with 73 minutes on the clock. So my live update tells me anyway, but that's the first leg of the Liga.
Fantastic stuff, because to be fair, Brendan, when Millonarios lose, generally football is the winner.
Do you know what's happening tomorrow? We're going to get to this in more detail in a second, but tomorrow's the 18th of June. Have you any idea what that day is?
Go on.
Millonarios'
birthday.
Yeah.
The bloody birthday thing, yeah. That is absolutely bizarre. That's I've never been anywhere in the world where a football team has a birthday. And more to the point, not only has a birthday that, a couple of fans kind of put on social media or whatever, and it's a sort of excuse, but a birthday that generally paralyzes the city. So they all just go marching around and celebrating. It's almost like a little mini festival day.
Yeah, they could have the worst, and in fairness, they had a few bad seasons there not too long ago. The worst season ever, and they'll still go out and celebrate. You can call it passionate and nice, and it's great to have something to stand up for, but it seems a bit weird to just celebrate the birthday of the club. And plus, it's not like it's a club that doesn't have its success. But we'll get to that in a second. Let's concentrate on La Selección, the men's national team, because they were playing today, Ollie, and a 0-0 draw, the most one-sided 0-0 draw or tie, as they would say in the States.
Yeah, I think Ospina could have called over a coach and had a game of chess, couldn't he? There's nothing for him to be doing. But at the other side, Farney as well. I mean, the boys had a few form ups and downs, but when he turns it on, he really is spectacular, isn't he?
Oh yeah, he kept them in the game. There was that overhead kick that he saved, a few other point blank saves as well. Just incredible, how Colombia didn't win. And then in the end, you could say Colombia kind of lost in a sense that they were the team that ended up with 10 men, because we had a few little bits of, well, still they were the one that got the straight red card. I mean, when I saw it then, I was wondering at the start what it was for, but then when I saw what it was, I kind of thought, okay, probably merited. But there were a few handbag moments in it too. It's hard to know that this is a ridiculous Copa America anyway. They're in a group of 5 teams, and the top 4 go through to the quarterfinals. So I mean, it's highly unlikely they are not going to get to the quarterfinals. Obviously, the position will determine who they play in the other group. So, if they finish 4th or 3rd, maybe they're going to face Argentina or Chile or something like that.
That's right. We're playing for 2 weeks just to get rid of Bolivia and Venezuela. It seems it is worth pointing out that the order you finish in your group will determine who you play in the next round. A little bit like, say, the NBA finals. So the top-ranked team in the northern group will play the bottom-ranked, the position 4 team in the southern group, etc. So they do cross across like that.
Yeah, well, I think it's fair enough, because as far as I know, in the domestic league, they cut off the top 8, and then it's just a random draw. So the points that you've accrued to be top of the table count for nothing.
Go nowhere. Yeah, there's no point doing it. I've always found that very strange.
Yeah, it is weird. And by the way, as you said, guys, we might have lost a few people if they're not into football. They're kind of going, oh no, they're going to be talking about football for the next while. But if you do want to get on my screen froze there for a second, if you do want to send us your thoughts, if you've gone to a match here, have you gone to a La Selección game or to a domestic game, one of the big ones, or maybe the teams less well known, of course, when there's usually just a few dogs running around and hardly any supporters at them. That might be just as interesting.
Oh, were you in Russia? Were you in Russia? Were you in Brazil? Were you at any of the recent Copa Americas? Have you seen Colombia abroad? Yeah, lots of stuff happening.
Yeah, because we want to kind of talk about that in the last, since we've both really been here in 10 years, this kind of second golden generation, if we can call that team of the 90s their first golden generation, which really was Valderrama and Valderrama for me is the man who stands out anyway. But this second golden generation, of course, players like James and Falcao were the pinnacle. James with that amazing goal at the World Cup, but even before that, he was in that qualifying. It was kind of our introduction and coincided with this revolution again in Colombian football. And of course, James is making the news, but for the wrong reasons these days. Looks like maybe his international career, well, is it in jeopardy?
Yeah, that's getting very salty, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing to have a spat with the coach. The coach might move on in a couple of years, whatever. It's another thing to sort of be carping from the sidelines. It's a very different thing when your own teammates start putting out tweets, pointedly talking about how good the atmosphere is. There are no divisive personalities, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's not a good look, is it?
Yeah, and as far as I know, he would have been good friends with the likes of Cuadrado and all that. And arguably, of course, James has played his best football with La Selección. His club football has certainly been patchy in the last 6-7 years, really since 2014. He hasn't been consistent at all. By the way, just go on. Yep.
Because you would think he'd be at the peak of his powers now. He's not old. He's certainly not retirement old. And he's just drifting about. He doesn't, he seems to be an extremely good player. Nobody's ever going to doubt his skill and his intelligence on the pitch. You do have to worry a little bit, I think, about his application.
Yeah, so James aside, and Falcao, I guess, who's just, age and injury really has caught up with Falcao. But this team, without a kind of big global superstar, they look like they're going to be consistent for the next while. Okay, today they didn't find the net, but bar those odd games under Carlos Queiroz where they lost, 6-1 or 6-0 to Ecuador and 3-0 to Uruguay. Yes, and obviously now we've a new coach. He's back again, Reynaldo Rueda. They should always be expecting to get to a World Cup. That should be the lead.
No, it is a tough group to get out of. Let's not forget. I mean, if you think of the Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil are all big noises. Yeah, Chile are fading away. Their golden generation is sort of dropping off a bit now. But even so, Chile, it's never easy to go to Ecuador. It's a strong group.
Yeah, but if you're going to go by population as well, they're obviously the third are the most populated in that, or the second most?
Second,
yeah. Now, obviously, there are the geographical issues here. Of course, all the players play abroad anyway. That's not really an issue.
Yeah. But, India and China are not that good at football.
Yeah, but it's the tradition I'm talking about, Ollie. Obviously, India... no interest at all really in it, and the Chinese seem to be gaining an interest in association football, as people in certain parts of the world call it. But with the tradition, and now that they seem to have got their national act together as a team, they should be able to maintain that level of consistency. And
it's interesting what you say. I mean, I think you're definitely right when you say there's not kind of a superstar in the way that Falcao was a genuine, continent leading when he was in Europe, continent leading striker. James Rodriguez, obviously a golden ball at the World Cup, superb stuff, goal of the year, that sort of thing, transferring around for 80 million euros or whatever. These are obviously superstar players. But let's remember that we look at the Colombian team that was on the pitch today. They're playing at the top level, all of them. They're not playing for slouch clubs. These are, Muriel and Zapata up at the top. They're playing year in, year out Champions League football with Atalanta. You got Jerry Mina, Davinson Sanchez, both playing at certainly strong top half teams in the Premier League. So this is definitely not not a team of slouches by any means. Cuadrado, obviously, at Juventus.
Of course, and that Morelos, if I'm pronouncing his name right, at Rangers, he can't even get a look in, really. Okay, I know it's the Scottish League and Rangers, but they were runaway winners, and they usually compete pretty well in European football. So, there's strength and depth there. That's the point I'm making.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and I think that's where it is a little bit different from in the past, where we've maybe seen one or two star players, and then not everything, weak links in other positions. Doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. And of course, some people just as we mentioned with James, some people are just better for the national team than they are at club level.
Yeah, that's true. By the way, before we kind of get onto club rivalries and things like that, I just wanted to mention women's football, because last year I did a podcast with the football reporter who we're hoping to have on today, Carl Warswick, but he's obviously on duty watching, or I'm not sure, at Tolima Millonarios. But he mentioned that, okay, I know women's football all over the world, arguably perhaps not in the United States, where the women's game is probably stronger than the men's game. But it does play second fiddle to the men's game all over the world. But in a country traditionally seen as misogynist in many ways, according to Carl, the way the women's game has been treated here has just been absolutely diabolical. Yeah, shocking altogether. And it's interesting. As I said, obviously the women's game in many places across the world just doesn't get the same kind of support. But does it even register a beat here when the women's team do play?
Yeah, it's really I mean, there's certainly, I think, the streets were deserted at 4-ish today, poking my head out of the window. Well, maybe not deserted, but there's a lot of people watching the match. And that's generally true, I think, of most men's matches, big events. When the ladies team play in, they were at the World Cup 2 World Cups ago, whenever that was, 2015. I get a bit lost on my Women's World Cups. It was really interesting that the men's team was doing poorly in the Copa America, and yet everybody watching all the matches. And the women's team were doing pretty well in the, making a good account of themselves in the Women's World Cup, but just no attention to it at all. I would say, although Carl is right, there are some points that are quite good. There are good noises coming out of Di Mayor at times, and it does seem to me as well like the clubs, most of the clubs, definitely not all, but most of the clubs tend to support the women's game. Santa Fe are usually tweeting about the Leonesas, etc.
Yeah, okay. So we'll give them, I guess, a pass mark in that. But
I wouldn't go that far. Okay. I just say it's not completely negative. We still have these ridiculous. Tolima being one of the examples. Leaving the women's team to kind of sleep at an airport. They'd never make the male stars do that.
Yeah. Okay, so a few yellow shoots among lots of absolute muck. I guess that's what you're saying. Okay, club rivalries. As I've maybe alluded to, I don't think I've said it. That I might as well show it here. Millonarios. There you go. There it is. There's the top. It's not on me, unfortunately, because it's a bit dirty. But yeah, nominally a Millonarios fan. I'll give the reasons why. Basically, most of my earliest Colombian friends, or Bogotanos at least, were Millonarios and are Millonarios. So, and my drinking buddies in the tiendas tended to be Millonarios. So I went along with Millonarios because the first jersey that I ever bought here was a Nacional jersey, going in with the millions, of course, that follow them for maybe no good reason at all. Because as we mentioned, or I mentioned this in some of the preview posts that I was putting on social media, you could call Nacional the Manchester United of Colombia. But as I said, made friendships here, then I said, I'll follow Millos, but not a fanatic. You are, Ollie?
I'm more towards Santa Fe. It's a very nominal support of Santa Fe, but nonetheless, it is. Santa Fe would be the team I'd root for. I'd also say, Brendan, with the greatest of respect to yourself, while I am nominally a Santa Fe supporter, I'm also quite against Millonarios. I'd say I'm almost more against Millonarios than I am for Santa Fe in many ways. I generally think I don't really like teams playing in blue, I have to be honest. There are a couple of exceptions. Everton are obviously the good team in Liverpool. But generally speaking, I think if we look at sort of Blackburn Rovers, Bristol Rovers, Glasgow Rangers, Chelsea, teams in blue, not very nice.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's not like me to support teams in blue really either. But just as I said, for friendship reasons, there's a team I kind of keep an eye on. And it just so like even in this barrio, any of the guys here in Santander City who are into football, because surprisingly enough, amongst my drinking buddies here, there's a high number that are really indifferent to football, which kind of seems weird. It's in La Perseverancia really where my love affair with Millos was formed. And Fernando, the owner of a tienda there, like he's mad Millonarios. Actually, all week he's been sending me various posts about Millonarios as they go for their Estrella número 16. They're going for their 16th title in a sense, of the 16th star that they'll get on their jersey. But when we talk about titles, of course, we have to remember you've got the opening and the closing. So there's 2 titles per year.
Bizarre, yeah. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, I mean, it's just so much football, isn't there? I remember, remember the Nacional glory years, kind of in the last decade. I think there was one year where Real Madrid played all the possible games that they could play. And Madrid only ended up playing sort of 70 matches, which for a European team is a lot. But Nacional clocked up, I think, 90 matches that season. 90 games. That's, playing once every 4 days for the entire year. Absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, it is madness.
I mean, to the point where you get teams having to do things like literally have parallel squads. I find it also really bizarre. The national team are playing today, so why is there domestic football going on?
Exactly. Yeah, you just would not get that. In Ireland, actually, you do, but that's because our football setup, soccer setup in Ireland is semi-professional. So most of the Irish internationals are drawn from professional clubs, mostly in England and in other countries. So it does happen. But I remember when Nacional went to the Club World Cup, and then they had games on here at the same. Oh, because that was it. It was the last game I went to in El Campín. It was Santa Fe Nacional in the semi-final. I think first leg of the Liga Águila, as it was at the time, and I just managed to get hold of a few easy tickets. So I went along with a friend of mine, and I told my brother-in-law, who likes to bet on football, I bet on Santa Fe because Nacional, this is like their second string, and even at that almost third string, they're playing like 18-year-olds and everything. Santa Fe have full strength. This should be 4 or 5-0. Nacional won 1-0 because their first team. The point was were out at the Club World Cup, wherever it was at the time. But yeah, that just shows you how bad Santa Fe were that night. And speaking of going to games, though, I was intrigued. There were many players called Hijo de Puta, which I found fascinating.
Well, on that note, I find it really odd how they often have the sponsor's name on the back.
Yeah,
that really confuses me often. Yeah, I'm sitting there going, what? Well, why is he called Honda? That's a strange name, for a Colombian player. But okay, immigration is a thing. But he can't have 11 brothers. So yeah, no, I find that really. Well, he could have 11 brothers, but they're probably not all playing in the same team. I'll tell you another thing that I find really weird. coming from England, where very much cities are split by area, it feels to me really weird that there isn't kind of a Millonarios area or a Santa Fe area. You have little zones of the city that are marked out by graffiti, but it's not like you could say, for example, North London, it's all Tottenham and Arsenal, and then out to the east you've got West Ham and Orient and teams like that. The south tends to skew more towards Palace and Chelsea, and obviously Fulham. Out west you've got QPR. You don't meet very many QPR fans coming from Charlton, or vice versa. Whereas it does seem to me like Santa Fe have and Millonarios both have fans all around the city.
Well, and the country, yeah. But I guess, I don't know, I don't really have an answer for that. I don't know why. It just kind of depends maybe on family ties and things like that, who your brother supported, who your father or your mother, or things.
Who was successful at the time as well. I mean, America obviously have so many fans despite not having been successful for a very long time.
Well, that's right, yeah. But then they did have their golden period. However it came about, let's not go too much into that. Well, look, people say a lot of Millonarios titles. It's just that it kind of got associated with America the Cali, but Millonarios as well aren't exactly saints in that regard. I don't think so. But have you been to a game here?
Oh, yes, I've been to quite a few. The most recent game I went to was in 2019, a Medellin derby, Nacional versus Independiente. And I've got to say, by the way, Brendan, for all everyone talks about violence here, I would say it was much better controlled than any kind of British derby would be. Independiente fans, Medellin fans arrived at the sort of stadium area together. There was no segregation, no separation. People were wearing colours openly. What clearly wasn't a problem. Sometimes they were even socialising. They, of course, were segregated inside the stadium. So you've got an Independiente area and a Medellin area. But yeah, I was genuinely very surprised because, of course, it's been a while since Millonarios. Well, maybe it's changed again, but Millonarios and Santa Fe, until fairly recently, would play with only one set of fans.
Yeah, I think that was how it was meant to be even when they played Nacional that day. I went to the game back in 2018. I think it was 2018. And the thing is, obviously you have a lot of Nacional fans here in Bogotá, as I mentioned, kind of the Manchester United of Colombia. And a few of those got their hands on tickets, and for the whole game, they were just dressed in normal clothes or whatever. And then when Nacional scored a goal near the end, after 80 minutes, they start jumping up and down, and it was near to where we were, and we were in the safe end. We weren't with any kind of ultras. If Santa Fe do have ultras in that sense, but when they started celebrating, that raised the ire of the guys next to us, and a mini riot broke out. So the police and the security had to step in, and the stadium was half empty. It wasn't close to full at all, but you still had that little bit because I was at a game.
I've been to the National Stadium for a junior match, and my gosh, Brendan, I mean that was. That was absolutely absurd. We're in a stadium of whatever it is, 50,000 people or 40,000. There must have been an attendance, in the hundreds. So we literally had a choice of seating, several rows wide. It was absolutely bizarre experience.
Well, that's the thing. To go back to my friend Fernando in La Perseverancia, and his son also is a fanatic. The whole family really are medium. And I'm pretty sure they've never gone to a game.
Wow.
It makes... I just don't get it. You can't really blame cost because you can get a ticket for 20, 30,000, So they'd be watching the game, having a few beers. They'd spend that money anyway. close to it. So I don't know. It's an interesting one. Oh, by the way, I've got news for you, Ollie.
Okay, go on.
The 7th minute of injury time, Millonarios have equalised against Deportivo.
That's going to feel like a win going back home, isn't it?
Yeah, and with 10 men, a man sent off after 50 minutes. There you go. So a big turnaround there, perhaps. Is that one hand on the apertura, as they call it, for Millonarios, the return leg on Sunday. Speaking of having games when the national team is playing, it's happening again on Sunday.
Perfect timing, yeah. Just very, very strange, yeah. I do. All of that's very weird. I think there's maybe a little. There's certainly not a culture of travelling to games in the same way there would be in England or Ireland. Just because I think the distances and the cost would just be, very prohibitive to many people. You do get some strange things. I remember being on a bus travelling around in the south of Colombia. I think we were going to Pasto, and there was a couple of Tolima fans. Or Pasto fans had gone to Tolima to see a match, and they were coming back, and they weren't by no means rich, and coming back, on a torturous set of buses. This wasn't a direct route. This was, off of one 4x4 and onto another. So some people, clearly do it, but I think you're right. There's not the same kind of. I think football's often televised here, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's it. But that's been a change, of course, in the last couple of seasons since we've been here. You'd always have the league games on RCN. Now they've moved to pay-per-view.
Trapped.
And that obviously angered a lot of average Colombians because it means it's now more difficult to watch the games. You either go into a tienda, and not every tienda is going to have the channel that you need. It's like Win Plus or whatever. You have to buy a special package. Yeah, so it makes it more awkward for sure. But yeah, Ollie, I just mentioning kind of TV coverage though, just in a general sense. Of course, Colombia is famed for their commentators and one commentator particularly. And it just dawned on me today that the game against Venezuela was on RCN. And I thought, it's the exact same commentator that does it for Caracol. And I asked the guy, I'm not saying that the guy in the panaderia where I was watching the game, that this is the gospel truth, that he's an authority on it. But he said, oh yeah, it's the same commentator. Like, they just move him around, which again seems weird. Obviously you wouldn't have the BBC football commentators moving over to the other channel. Like, so, but he's obviously a legend with his. Go on, do you want to do it? I don't even want to give it a try.
Oh, the getting long. They clearly must train for that, don't they? Doing the whole goal de Colombia. Yeah, no, that's not bad, is it? It's
yeah.
Although they usually go
de Colombia. Yeah, they kind of let that go.
I used to have a great bit of. There used to be a great bit of footage on YouTube where you can see René Higuita's scorpion kick, which of course was in Wembley. I remember watching it on the TV in my house, and the difference between the English commentary and the Colombian commentary is just incredible, and watching them back to back really highlights the difference.
Yeah, well, it's like that Simpsons episode where they're showing a football match at the start, a soccer match, and it's the American commentator going, and Pritchard has the ball and knocks it back to Corrigan, and Corrigan knocks it back to Pritchard, and then it cuts to the Latin America. It's like, hey, Pritchard got it! And it's just, yeah. It sums it up nicely. Anyway, I think we're just about there, Ollie, on our little football feast today. Yeah,
we had a 3-minute warning 3 minutes ago, so yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, will you be going out then to celebrate? There'll be more people on the street tomorrow, perhaps, I don't know, will the pandemic change that for Millonarios' birthday? Then they'll go. Then they'll be at El Campino, I guess, for the return leg on Sunday.
I will be sitting in a coffee shop with an English friend, just like I was 5 years ago, and hopefully with a much less mentally scarring experience.
You're on about England-Scotland now.
I very much am, yes.
But when did England last lose to Scotland?
No, the last time I watched England play football with this friend in a coffee shop in Colombia, we lost to Iceland.
Oh, okay. Now I get it.
That mighty nation with the population of Suba. Significantly smaller than Suba, should I say? Anyway,
I'm going to say, let's come on, Scotland. Vamos to Scotland. Okay. Ciao, guys. Until next time.
Ciao. Bye-bye.